on Initiative Africa. My name is Asha Samput. Welcome to this new edition of your weekly magazine featuring Africa on the move through smart innovations and initiatives that work. Let's get on with the show with our top stories today. We meet Yves Wansi this week, a visually impaired Franco-Cameroonian who arrived in France at the age of 18 and made his disability a strength and an inspiration. He has just launched the association Déficient Visuel Lancez-vous, or Visually Impaired Get Started, in Cameroon to provide innovative solutions to the disabled in his native country. He's our guest this week.
What I want for the NGO is the DV Ensemble concept of mixing the visually impaired, the blind and the sighted in all our activities.
A high-level cardiology and oncology hospital based in Nairobi, Kenya, has been in existence for almost 20 years, a major asset in the face of increase in cardiovascular disease and cancer in Africa.
In East Africa, which is not limited to East Africa, basically it's the entire sub-Saharan Africa region. And we have had projections of up to 70% of new cases globally happening in these parts of the world.
Spotlight on the world of the visually impaired in Yaoundé in Cameroon. Emancipation inspired by Yves Wansi's NGO in a spirit of community sharing.
We had to create a project to get the visually impaired and blind out of their comfort zone, their home, their sedentary lifestyle. The aim is to make the visually impaired become actors of their own emancipation and aspirations.
According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular disease will be the leading cause of death in sub-Saharan Africa by 2025. The Aga Khan Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya benefits from advanced medical technologies to treat these pathologies which have become too frequent. We had met this Center of Excellence and its staff. Take a look.
It's the end of a long night's work for Dr. Jailan and his team at the cardiac surgery unit in Nairobi's Aga Khan Hospital. This is one of the nerve centers of the Aga Khan Development Network, an agency that has been active in East Africa's healthcare sector for many years.
I'm an interventional cardiologist, which means that when people come in and have a heart attack, I can look at the blood vessels that supply blood to the heart, the coronary arteries, and look to see if there are any blockages.
When Dr. Jailan left his practice in England a year ago, he was astonished by what he found in Africa, by the new diseases he saw.
I was astonished to find when I arrived that the prevalence and the extent of coronary artery disease in patients in this part of the world is as severe, if not more severe, than it is in other parts of the world. There are more people getting this condition. It's not that we're better at picking it up, but there are more people getting this condition. And there are lots of reasons why that might happen. The prevalence of diabetes, for instance, in this part of the world is increasing. High blood pressure is a very common condition that affects almost a third of Kenyans above the age of 25.
This private health clinic was founded in 1958 and is now the most respected in Nairobi. In another wing of the hospital, Dr. Makumi treats another disease that is relatively new to Africa. With the changes in lifestyle and growing industrial pollution, there has been a steady growth in the number of cancers. In Kenya, there are 20,000 deaths per year and 28,000 new cases.
Over the last 2 decades, we have seen an increasing number of cancers in East Africa, which is not limited to East Africa, basically it's the entire sub-Saharan Africa region. And we have had projections of up to 70% of new cases globally happening in these parts of the world.
Patients here will often refuse the appropriate treatment out of ignorance of an illness still misunderstood by many.
We have to deal with a lot of patients who want to go and try traditional medicines, herbs and other local medicine, which are not helpful to them. And it's very, very challenging to make people change and understand that maybe they can get good response from chemotherapy or radiotherapy as opposed to traditional medicine.
With less infectious diseases but more cardiovascular diseases and cancers, there has been an added financial burden to bear. As in developed countries, these pathologies are expensive both for hospitals and for patients. The new Aga Khan Center in Nairobi, with its pioneering techniques in cardiology and early screenings for cancers, cost $50 million. It is a daily challenge to find ways of providing cutting-edge treatment without leaving the least privileged behind. The AKDN healthcare system has been present in East Africa for decades. With its 4 hospitals and 66 consultancy clinics, as well as 5 healthcare centers in Tanzania, the network is finding ways to adapt to the changing situation.
In this wide network, we are not integrated, through a coordinated system. So His Highness asked us to come together where he could see one integrated health system across East Africa that would be underpinned by teaching and capacity building, so that we are creating healthcare providers and healthcare professionals that are so much in shortage here, and that we are emulating world standards, internationally best standards, and we are doing research that is relevant to the diseases of this region, and it has to be replicable, and it has to be financially sustainable. So you build systems that have good margins of operation that then can pay for education, can pay for serving the poor. So it's kind of like a Robin Hood.
This approach to healthcare takes account of the patient's plight, focusing on their needs rather than their financial resources.
To reach out to patients most in need, and this allows patients who, for instance, may not be able to afford a certain type of pacemaker, which could be life-changing or in fact life-saving, to apply through the welfare scheme and get access to these treatments. And what I would say is that I've been here for more than a year, and I haven't even had one patient rejected by the welfare scheme.
The increasing popularity of such vast integrated healthcare systems parallels the emergence of an ever more affluent middle class. People that will sooner no longer need to leave the continent to get the right treatment.
Let's now meet our guest of the week. A social and solidarity entrepreneur, Yves Wansi wanted to bring to his native country the concept of his association, DV Lancez-vous, which aims to break down the silos of visually impaired people by allowing them to live their dreams. He explained how to Laurence Sustras. Yves Wansi, hello. You have just set up an NGO in Cameroon. What makes this one different from the others?
Quite simply, the NGO that I'm launching in Cameroon, which is called DV Lancez-vous, differs by the fact its support for the visually impaired people will be unlike the other NGOs that take care of people with all sorts of disabilities. That's because there are no NGOs that deal specifically with visual impairment.
Aren't there enough organizations in Africa? Is the idea to bring a different approach with your own experience?
There are some systems in place in Africa. There are, but support for those with a visual disability is different because it's complex. Here in Europe, there's a different concept, a different way of doing things. But down there, it's different because it's just considered part of life. Disabilities are not treated differently since there's no disability allowances. Disability payments exist, but not there. There is another way of helping. The need is for an NGO that is in line with what is already being done. And there are many things being done for the visually impaired. We want to bring a new kind of expertise. It's what we've developed here in Europe, and that's what we want to offer.
And what is the expertise exactly?
It's all about being straight with visually impaired people, telling them that they too can work like anyone else. IT, digital jobs, entrepreneurship. We don't talk about disability, which is something that always upsets me, and it's an attitude I want to make clear is wrong. People with disabilities can make a valuable contribution to society. So let's take that message to young people in Africa. I'm not just talking about simple labouring work, music, or switchboard operator, even if a switchboard operator's job doesn't exist there. It does here in France. But no, we tell them no. There are other professions, soft skills they can go and find, not just a token job jobs, labouring, sewing or shoemaking, like some, or begging in front of a church. No, there are other ways of thinking. People might say, no, there aren't the same opportunities as in Europe in terms of employment and entrepreneurship. Yes, but there are things that are done that can be done. It just takes bringing expertise based on what people have experienced elsewhere, that they've managed to change, like me and the others I'm doing it with.
As you say, you have a long history of supporting the visually impaired and blind in eastern France. What did you learn from this experience in practical terms?
What I learnt is resilience, networking skills, linking, experience, adventure, and above all, to go beyond the limits that visual impairment imposes on us by creating projects, in short. I'm a great traveller. I've had many adventures in hostile conditions, complicated adventures, skiing for hours in the cold, climbing mountains, rock climbing, parachuting, extreme things not often associated with the visually impaired or the blind. And my idea is if I can be an ambassador for people with visual disabilities by showing them that despite what society thinks you ought to be doing, you can do this or that, you can change your life. Which is to say, we don't always have to believe or imagine how a blind or visually impaired person thinks, such as, oh, I can't travel, can't go on an adventure, can't go climbing or skiing, can't do computers, can't video, can't walk for hours. I show that through the adventures I've had, above all since what I do, it's true that I'm a small-time adventurer. I'm not a great adventurer, but I always take visually impaired and blind people with me to say we need to be ambassadors, both young and old with disabilities, who are inactive and mainly who think that they cannot succeed. They must free themselves. How? By going beyond the limits of our disability.
Growing up with a visual impairment yourself, what was your childhood and adolescence like in Cameroon?
Alors j'ai vécu une enfance très heureuse parce que je ne connaissais
I had a very happy childhood, very happy, because I didn't know what disability meant, because it's Africa. We have a different vision of disability compared to France, and it's very sociological, since I've had the time to analyze it. In Africa, in fact, our survival depends on social cohesion, that we are part of society when we have a disability. I already had a visual problem. I was often called blind. It made us laugh. It made me laugh because I was part of society. I had my place. I had my say. I had a very happy childhood. In France, we found a situation where you're compartmentalized. Communities are separated. It's just how rich countries are. The means exist to provide disability allowances and pensions, and that, in fact, pigeonholes you, the disabled. So there is this difference. In France, in Europe, you are partitioned. You are there. Stay there and don't bother us. Whereas in Africa, really, you are a member of society. And I created this association out of resilience. I said, no, the visually impaired have no need to be compartmentalized. They have their place too. But how to create an organization that's complementary with what already exists? We're not here to reinvent the wheel. There are NGOs which do great things, which provide support, funding, or projects and employment. We needed an association that makes you dream, that can make you travel, that allows the visually impaired, who do not necessarily want to be lumped together with the disabled in the same type of activities. So instead, let's offer travel, climbing, hiking, dancing, culture, fashion, cooking. That is what we brought to DV Ensemble, and it's changed the lives of many visually impaired people in Strasbourg and even around the world. Well, a lot in Europe too, because we're very popular. Not only in France, but also abroad. It's due to our drive and energy. What I want for the NGO is the DV Ensemble concept of mixing the visually impaired, the blind, and the sighted in all our activities, because it brings several things. Awareness, for one thing, as awareness is education. Then training. We teach how to behave with a blind person, how a blind person can find employment, can study. That's another pillar. And then there's creation. Create projects with the disabled. Offer things to the disabled, such as associations, setting up a business or a movement. Create parties. The other pillar now is to continue our support for an organization put together and led by the people with disabilities themselves, the visually impaired and the blind, and the able-bodied, of course. And our other driver is emancipation.
Welcome to the second part of our show. In this report, we followed our guest Yves Wansi in his journey to his homeland, Cameroon. His NGO has initiated an ambitious project to include the disabled through more innovative and diversified solutions than those they usually find in their scope. Restore hope, bring people living with a visual impairment to let their genius explode and make use of it, change the negative outlook on visual impairment and the potential of the disabled. This is the fight he has embarked on in Yaoundé under the eye of the camera of our correspondent, Aboubakar Siddiq Munchali. Take a look. A trip to his country of origin to meet young people suffering from visual impairment. Yves Wansi has dreamed of it for several years. This social entrepreneur from the Cameroonian diaspora in France was evacuated from his birth country at a very young age due to a severe eye disease.
Growing up in Cameroon, I didn't know what it meant to be handicapped. For me, a disabled person was someone who was in a wheelchair, someone who was lame, as we often say here. And when I left, I didn't quite understand it. It's when I came to France that I really discovered that disability restricts you to being part of the disabled community. Together, we do things together. You are given pensions and subsidies. You say nothing, you do nothing. In the process, I discovered a world that was a little sedentary, a world that was also not really aware of its potential, its talent, and a world that had no future.
Visually impaired himself, Yves Wansi was revolted by his experience, and he became determined to embark on this permanent fight to empower the visually impaired and blind by freeing them from the obstacles and other prejudices hindering their development.
For me, it was a revolt. That's how I slowly realized we had to create a project to get the visually impaired and blind out of their comfort zone, their home, their sedentary lifestyle. The aim is to make the visually impaired become actors of their own emancipation and aspirations, and that's why I always wanted to come back to Cameroon.
Returning to Cameroon after nearly 10 years of preparation to kickstart this long adventure beside the young visually impaired people across the African continent, Yves Wansi has chosen to do it through concrete solutions and a solid project. His NGO, DV Lancez-vous, and Share the Cola concept, named after this fruit from the cola tree in the form of a nut, very popular in Africa, and which is eaten here in community together and has occupied an important place in the local traditions.
The cola is shared in the community. We decided to launch the Share the Cola concept because we learned with the cola and with the blind and visually impaired who teach us with their cola. This is the start of a long and extensive collaboration because they bring a successful concept from Europe, everything that they've implemented in Europe. They come here with great ideas, with everything that's already been done in the field.
Well, I think that meetings like this are critical, and it brings light into our lives and remove the shadows, the darkness in the minds of people who live with a disability. This meeting in Yaoundé was a great opportunity to present the content of this initiative and to offer young people a whole plethora of activities for 2 days. Debates, screenings, workshops, coaching, field trips, among others. This is the ongoing work that has started a year ago.
We have already started the work. It began a year ago with a meeting with young people and with a series of discussions. We talk, we share, we tell stories. We exchange stories about our lives and how we got to where we are now. Once, there was a young person who participated in an international podcast competition for the visually impaired, the blind and the sighted. He thought he couldn't do it. He did it online. He won first prize. That's what we mean by support.
Ange Gangoum is the winner of this prize. He also shared his experience with his peers as part of the introductory workshop on podcast production on the agenda of this meeting.
It's a real pleasure for me. Now I think my plans are to finish the training this competition allowed me to benefit from.
Training is precisely at the heart of the strategy and actions of DV Lancez-vous, which intends to take advantage of the enormous opportunities offered by digital technologies today.
We are creating synergies where we provide distance training because much is done for the blind and visually impaired thanks to new technologies, IT, And we also help with the materials that we can provide. But our main task is not to donate materials. We mainly offer business, psychological and recreational support, and above all, helping them meet and go beyond their potential.
A win-win for the Association for the Assistance and Support of Vulnerable and Disabled Children, Marche en Avant, and its foster home for these young people in the heart of the town of Soa, suburb of the capital Yaoundé. I worked for a long time in a centre for the blind, and there I saw the way children were cared for. I spent 11 years there, and one fine day, some children came, 4 blinds, and I welcomed them into my home. They spent the holidays. Every morning they went out to play the tam-tam on the streets to get something to eat. I was touched by that. I said to myself, why such talented children need to go to beg when they can have a normal life and also a better life later? An idea that Yves Wansi and his teammate Achille Guem, a talented actor-artist also from the Cameroonian diaspora, have experimented. Introducing these young people to the theatre is the way to support this project.
Knowing the amorphous situation of someone with a visual impairment, who either has his head down all the time or is totally marginalized because isolation is all he can look forward to, a withdrawn person who doesn't even trust his own limbs, at least the ones that still function. So theatre is a great opportunity. They learn to speak in public, express themselves, and also it's some sort of physical awakening for their bodies. There are so many great tools we can give them.
The stakes are therefore high for this NGO committed through this model of raising awareness about visual impairment, using innovative actions for the inclusion of these people who have an outstretched hand towards society.
They must be taught to dream. I think when you have a disability, you don't dream. You don't have dreams anymore, whether it's in Cameroon, France, or anywhere. They believe it's their destiny. When you achieve something with your disability, you tell yourself that you can go beyond the limits of disability and you can do great things.
After Yaoundé in Cameroon, Yves Wansi and his team are already thinking of other African capitals and cities. In the line of sight, Cotonou in Benin or Dakar in Senegal, where they are keenly awaited by their younger peers. Let's now get back to Yves Wansi for the final part of his interview this week. He tells us how his visual impairment exacerbated his taste for adventure and his passion to learn and to try everything so that he has nothing to regret. Let's listen to him. Yves Wansi, you were 18 when you arrived in France. What memories do you have of this period after a childhood spent in Cameroon, where you didn't feel harassed and were part of the community?
Yes, of course, it was obvious. It's striking because we think that everyone is our friend. Everyone's our friend. We arrive in a country like the Care Bears. We say because we're African, we're together because we've seen someone who looks like us because they have the same skin color. But it's more subtle than that. There's no hello, for example, if we don't know each other. It's not the same like at home in our neighborhoods, in our cities where we visited in Cameroon. We pretty much all knew each other. Here, even if we know each other, it doesn't mean we can hang out. There's also the fact of pigeonholing people. And it's a matter of education too, the culture of the country, because you must know the rules, you must know the social codes. These are things we don't know because we are in a situation where we already have an illness, a disability. And besides, being a foreigner is another problem. So you must understand how to behave with a disabled person as well as a person with a different skin color.
You are someone who's very passionate. Do you think your disability is a reason you want to experience so much more in life?
Possibly, it's possible, but I already have a phrase I think of every day. It's something my father used to say, and I think it's what makes me want to increase my wish to do many things. He told it to me once, and I've never forgotten. It's that you should never regret having not tried. You must try not to regret things. I try whatever comes to mind, all I see, all I can do. For the simple reason that if you're disabled, or when you have a disability, life doesn't give you a great deal of choice, which means you are limited to 2, 3 choices. And often I say the most important thing in life is not to hold all the best cards, but to play well with the ones you have been dealt. And what happens every time I find something happening to me, or I have a meeting, or have an opportunity? I say maybe it's a life card, and I go for it. And I think that maybe I'll go blind in a few years. So why not try everything and give things a go right now? That way, when I do lose my sight, it will be easier to continue the activities that I and others have developed. I think that in life you have to be multi-skilled, because when you are also disabled, life does not offer you a lot of choice, as I have said. When you have an opportunity, you must seize it. And I seize all the opportunities that I can.
Is there a difference in the way disabilities are handled between Europe and Africa? Can you adapt from one continent to another, or do you expect some challenges when you return to Cameroon for your project?
Of course, I think there'll be much we need to get used to. It's one reason why I said first we're going to see what the state of play is, live there for a while, and get to know the situation they're going through and how they deal with it. We mustn't show up in this country, well, which is mine of course, with the condescension of the European who knows everything, who knows better. We must create things in line with the way things work, the culture and the habits of those with disabilities there. You need to really get out there, because the reality on the ground is different from the administrative reality. And for that, I think there'll be a lot of situations, a lot of difficulties, things I may not understand. When I was living in Cameroon, I didn't really understand what being visually impaired meant. For me, a disabled person was someone in a wheelchair or someone with a cane. And so I think I'm going to, I need to understand first. I feel like we will have a shock. I'll be shocked because what's simple here will be tough there. But you must manage with the means at hand. I've been following some young people there, and they do a lot with whatever they have. But also what is interesting is they are very receptive to information internationally, thanks to digital technology, since it's accessible to everyone, especially the visually impaired and the blind. You must know how to use it, you have to know how to access it. And so it's through this digital technology that we want to stay in touch remotely and even go into the field and understand how you operate. And if I can provide a solution to a problem some might regularly face, that's what I'll be trying to do. I'm not going to bring a completely new way of doing things with me, just some elements to add to what already exists, just some basics. That's the sort of thing we want to suggest.
Is this type of European condescension a bit like the attitude of the African diaspora when it returns to Africa?
Sure, but not everyone, of course. We shouldn't include everyone, but I think we have this arrogance, having gone to Europe in good circumstances, or bad, and then they became good, and coming back saying, yes, you fellows who stayed in Africa, I know more than you because I come from somewhere else. In fact, if we do that, it's because we've forgotten our roots, our fundamental values, such as humility, knowledge, our learning, and above all, respect for elders. And often, some don't have that, or they still have it, but they come back having forgotten the essentials. So we might be a bit like the European who feels superior towards Africans, and we think things won't work. There are many beautiful things happening there, but it's in the quality of life that they are happy. They may be happy or unhappy. It's up to them. What does it mean to be happy? Is it with what we have, or is it having money? Yes, that's the problem. That's what we need to ask ourselves. As I often say, what is it to see? Is to see because we have sight, or is it to see, to open your mind, to look, to see? What's the difference? All these questions must be asked. So you have to be humble, have a lot of humility and understanding. And there is condescension that needs to be erased, even among Africans in Europe. And often this arrogance comes from being the first one in a company or the first one in a city to be either elected or a well-known manager or boss of a famous startup. Then you become condescending to your fellow human beings. It happens very often, but not to everyone. There are exceptions, and that's what we want to bring, the exception.
Yves Wansi, thank you very much.
And thank you.
Well, that's it. Initiative Africa is over for today. You can, of course, find Yves Wansi's interview and the replay of our programs on our news website, africaonair.com. And, of course, you can also find us on all our social media channels. Feel free to share, like, and comment with the hashtag Initiative Africa. And don't forget, next week, same time, same channel, I'll see you again with a new edition of Business Africa. Have a great week and goodbye.